In this episode, I'm going to look at emotional attachment to place. This is kind of extending what we learnt about and the fact that people might perceive places in different ways based on certain factors like their age or their gender or their sexuality. So we're going to look at emotional attachment to place. This is part of the OCR A-Level Geography Spec 2.A, and I've highlighted the section that comes under there. And seeing how attachment to a place, an emotional attachment, might actually affect your behaviour in that place. So attachment, the idea of place attachment, is essentially, just in the most basic terms, the idea that there's a bond between people and places. People use and live in places, they have thoughts and feelings about a place, and it's about kind of understanding that bond between those people and places. It's kind of just one of the factors that makes up this wider idea of what we call a sense of place. I'm now going to go through some examples to kind of explore that idea of an emotional attachment to place. So if I showed you this picture, people will naturally have an emotional reaction to it. Some people will see it as a kind of scary, dilapidated house. But then if it was a place that someone had lived in their whole life and they were looking at this picture, then they might see this as their family home. They might have incredible memories of living in that house and all of the good things that had happened, even though it outwardly looks kind of run down. The key point of this is the fact is that our memories and our feelings, whether positive or negative, are very personal to us, and those memories and feelings that we get about places are therefore going to really influence the emotional attachment we give to them. So memories and feelings that everyone personally has really does kind of weigh into the emotions that we attach to places. Here's another example. This is a classic schoolroom. Some people will have really positive experiences at school, and so for them it will be seen as a really positive place with great memories and feelings. But for people that maybe aren't academically inclined or have struggled or have learning difficulties, it could be a place of anxiety. It could be a place where they were bullied at school. So those memories and feelings will mean that people will attach emotions to this place differently. Here's another example. This is looks like a nice stately home. It's actually Downing College in Cambridge. It's a place that could have positive experiences attached to it, and I'm going to explain a little bit more what I mean by that. It's a place that I went to university personally. So for me, it's a place where I have really positive experience of learning a lot, having some great formative experiences in my 20s. So for me, it's because I had so many positive experiences of this place, I have a really strong emotional attachment to it. That's actually the place I stayed in. That's my actual room. So if, like myself, you have a positive experience of a place, maybe it's going to a football stadium with your parents every weekend, or it's a place that you go on holiday with your family every year, you might have a stronger emotional attachment to that than most of you looking at this picture, where you will have no real emotional attachment to it because you don't have those memories and those feelings and those positive experiences. It obviously works vice versa for negative experiences. You might have an emotional attachment that it means you're quite distant from a place because of negative experiences. The idea of memories and feelings doesn't just work on a personal level, but it also works on a collective level. So we can experience memories and feelings as part of a group. Here's a picture of Auschwitz, and these are the gates at Auschwitz, which was a German World War II internment camp for people Jewish and other groups. This might be a place that is famous for the atrocities that went on here, but for particularly anybody of Jewish descent or Jewish relatives, this might have a more heightened emotion because as a group, it is a place where terrible things happened. You don't even have to have been there to know it, but it's in that collective experience of growing up Jewish. You know the stories that came out of here. You might have met people from there. But essentially, while most people would see this as a terrible place, because of someone's religion or their background, it might be a place that they have a heightened emotional attachment to, where they will have, terrible feelings about going there or kind of spending any time there. here's another example along those lines. It's to most people, this could just appear like the outside of any old bar. It's called the Stonewall Inn. But it's actually, in terms of if you were somebody of the LGBTQ plus community, it's a really important place. There were some huge riots in the late 60s between the gay community and the police, and it was a place that became really, really important politically for the gay liberation movement in the USA. And so collectively, as a place, for some people, this will have no emotional attachment. But if you are maybe part of the wider LGBTQ plus community in the US, but also on a worldwide scale, it's a very symbolic place. It's a place that is shown as the kind of starting place for increased rights for those communities. And therefore, even people that haven't even been there would have an emotional attachment to this place as a collective group. The last example in terms of how groups can have attached to a place is talking about Kurdistan. So the Kurds are a nation. They're an ethnic group that live across Syria, Iraq, Iran and Turkey. There's about 30 million of them. But this isn't an actual state with borders. It's a nation. So these are people with similar ethnic and religious background, but they live in separate states. Also, just as a key other factor is, about 3 million people are part of the diaspora. So they live away from the region, and there's an especially large community established in Germany. And that will come back into people having an emotional attachment to this place. It's a place where they are struggling and trying to compete with the states they're in to get a collective identity and get their own state. Similar to how we did the migration study about the Catalans in Catalonia and the Basques in the Basque region of France and Spain. So there has been some pretty horrific persecution of the Kurds in Iraq under the Saddam Hussein regime, and there's conflict between Kurdish kind of separatist groups and Turkish forces on the borders of Syria. Kurdish forces that want their own state and the Turkish forces that are trying to suppress that. Some of these Kurdish groups have been considered kind of terrorist organisations by others, but it's similar to those kind of separatist movements we've seen in other places. In this right picture, we can see that diaspora. This is in a protest held in Cologne, which is trying to kind of get the message out about the kind of the plight of the Kurds and the attempt to get Kurdistan. Both of these ideas, the kind of difficulties they've been through, and the diaspora kind of making lots of noise and kind of protesting in other places, they feed into this idea that Kurdistan is the homeland. So for people, if you are a Kurd living in these regions, or you're a Kurd living away from these regions, there is an emotional attachment to this area. The idea of trying to get your own state, this area where they have a collective ethnic group with a shared identity and religion and kind of history. This is their homeland. So for many Kurds, it is a place of real strong emotional attachment. And that is where that would obviously alter the way that they act in that place, but also in other places. So the diaspora really want to kind of have their own homeland, and they kind of put it on this huge pedestal, and therefore they will, protest and they go on marches in other countries. So we can see how having a strong emotional attachment to places might affect how you act in those places, but also how you kind of see and have feelings about those places.